Up with Sonali, and I'm your host, Sonali Kolhatkar. You can watch this program on Free Speech TV and listen to it on community and independent radio stations nationwide. Hundreds of movement leaders, activists, organizers, funders, and journalists gathered in Atlanta, Georgia in June 2023 at Alight, Arise, an invitation-only conference on reparations organized by the Decolonizing Wealth Project. As the conference's media partner, Yes Media spoke with more than a dozen prominent organizers, activists, and leaders. Among them were Venikia Williams, campaign manager at Media 2070, and Trevor Smith, Director of Narrative Change at Liberation Ventures, where he's building the Reparations Narrative Lab.
Hello, I'm Venikia Williams. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the campaign manager for Media 2070.
I'm Trevor Smith. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Director of Narrative Change at Liberation Ventures.
So the two of you are very much engaged in narrative work and narrative shifting, but you're at a conference around reparations. Tell me how the idea of reparations and narrative shifting collide, and what reparations means to someone who's engaged in narrative work.
I would say the way that they collide is that, that this nation has yet to really reckon with its history. And so for so long, when you say the word reparations, you would get like a recoil. So we really have to change the narrative around reparations and really see it as a healing process, instead of something that kind of makes us recoil. So I would say that's the way in which they intersect.
Absolutely. Just to add to that, stories tell us about who we can be, who we've been. And so the story around reparations and the reparative culture that we can build, it's our job to sort of build that what's never been seen before. And so the imaginative work of dreaming up new worlds is the work that I believe we do.
Yeah.
You have also, I know through your past work, talked about the idea of media reparations. What are media reparations?
Yes, so media reparations, we try not to be too prescriptive, but when we talk about it, we talk about what would the world look like if Black folks were able to own their stories from ideation through creation, through distribution, and a friend of ours recently added through experience. And so what would it mean? What would it look like for ownership and control without interference of white supremacy and racial capitalism to be present and to really own those stories and to reclaim what's been stolen?
Yeah, and to me, media reparations means a lot of things. But when I think about it, I think about anti-Black narratives and the role that the media has played in creating and sustaining anti-Black narratives. And so I think nowadays when we think about media, we think of kind of just traditional press, but kind of the first popular media in this country were minstrel shows. And that is where we got a lot of the anti-Black stereotypes that still stick with Black people today. Black people is lazy. That's a stereotype that was born through minstrel shows. And so when I hear media reparations, I think about what is the role that the media has to play in uprooting anti-Black narratives and creating a pro-Black world.
Absolutely. I would add to that, there's been the case of the myth of Black inferiority being perpetuated. And that's ever since the first newspaper was created, right? And so the technologies change, but the lie hasn't shifted much. And so it looks different with each new iteration of technology, but that myth and the anti-Black narratives remain. And so we're doing the work of undoing that and rewriting something more beautiful and more true and truly human.
Right. Media 2070, they have a great essay that details kind of the history of media and the role that they've played in creating and sustaining anti-Black harm. And they talk about how, the media profited off of slavery as well through the use of runaway slave ads. And so in thinking about reparations, I think we have to think about it holistically. Of course, the government has an important and probably the most important role to play, but there are other institutions that we also have to hold accountable in this work.
When we think about any kind of government support or reparations and directly, there is the national conversation around who is deserving of help, who is deserving of welfare or benefits, and certainly I'm sure it'll come up with reparations. And so how do those anti-Black narratives that perpetuate the myth of, as you were saying, Black inferiority play into or play against reparations becoming a reality?
Yeah, I mean they stand in a big way, and I think we see these narratives play out across our policy spaces. So I think we see it with food assistance, with SNAP, we see it with housing assistance, and then of course we're going to see it with reparations. There's this idea that Black people are irresponsible with money. There's this idea that Black people won't be and Ta-Nehisi Coates actually talked about this yesterday, that we would spend it irresponsibly, but that's not really the point. It's something that is owed. And so I think that reparations is actually a really beautiful project, because I think it is so large that it can actually uproot this idea that Black people don't know what to do with their money. They don't know how to self-govern, because I do think that sovereignty and is a really important part of the reparations conversation.
You were referencing the opening remarks by Ta-Nehisi Coates at this conference that we're meeting at, Alight, Align, Arise. And one of the other things he talked about was, well, first of all, he was like, it's none of anybody's business how people spend their money. But the other thing that I thought was so important was the portrayal of people as whole, complex human beings. He's written, comic book characters and narratives in mainstream media. And how important is that aspect of, is that a huge part of the work that you do around narrative shifting? That people of color, Black people, are complex human beings with all of the dimensionality that our traditional media have just left out often of the stories.
Yes. And so Black feminist thought, one of the manifestos talks about us being seen as levelly human, not as superhuman, not as less than, but being levelly human. And so when we say we want to write and access to these narratives, it's not just the ones that paint us in the best light, but in the truest sense, the ones that paint us the good, bad, and the ugly and show our full humanity. It's a reclamation of that. So I would say the complexities are the most beautiful stories.
Right. And we deserve to be superheroes. We deserve to be seen in that light. I mean, look at what we're seeing right now with the backlash with Little Mermaid. I think that it's very telling as a society when we are arguing about a children's story and who should play that children's story. Black people aren't even allowed to be mermaids. So I think that we need to tell full stories, whether they're fictional or non-fictional, stories of Black people. And we really deserve to be able to show up in the ways in which other communities have been able to show up in their stories.
Do you see a change, especially in the big commercial industries, the media making industries? Do you see a change because folks have infiltrated, if you will, these fought their way to the top or fought their way in the rooms where these stories are told?
I would say I've seen a change, but not enough change. And so oftentimes people want you to celebrate the one who got into the room and not all those that were left behind. There's this tokenism. There's this idea that just the one story is enough. But Media 2070 truly talks about a future that's abundant with stories. So it's not just one mermaid, right, but several. We can have a Spider-Man. We can have all these different stories that are being told. So it's not that the one isn't beautiful and shouldn't be celebrated, but it surely isn't enough.
Right. I think two things come to mind. I think in the midst of 2020, in the quote unquote racial reckoning, we saw a lot of newspapers start to apologize for institutional racism. I don't think that those apologies, I think, were welcomed, but I don't think that they went far enough. And one of the things that I would really like to see in terms of change from newspapers is different types of beats. There are so many reporters who report on crime, but there aren't as many reporters who report on care or report on mutual aid, all the ways in which we help each other, because they're not seen as newsworthy stories. But I actually think that the way in which we care for each other is much more important to write about and to think about on a day-to-day basis than the ways in which we harm each other.